Good morning, I'm Adam Sexton. While the President of the United States won't accept the apparent results of the 2020 election, his avenues for overturning the vote in multiple states are either narrowing or disappearing altogether. This morning, to discuss both the legal side of what's unfolding and to provide some insight, perspective of the man set to become America's 46th president, we welcome retired Justice John Broderick. Thanks for joining us this morning, Justice.
Adam, great to be with you.
First, it doesn't appear the president is having much success in court, primarily because he isn't coming up with much, if any, hard evidence to back claims of a massive fraud. I know this might be oversimplifying here, but take us through the difference between what's happening now and what happened 20 years ago in Bush v. Gore.
Well, what's happening now is very different than what happened in Florida all those years back. Right now, the President of the United States is claiming a massive voter fraud. That wasn't a claim in Florida back in 2000. And so he wanted the vote to stop, then he wanted the vote to be counted in some states. And so his lawsuits thus far have not met with much success. And I doubt they will. I mean, I haven't read the pleadings, but I've read the news accounts of them. And I think the president's going to hit a wall on this. And I think it's important for him to have the right to pursue it. I'm a lawyer and a former judge, so I think people are entitled to due process. But I think at some point, if it becomes apparent, as it's becoming, I think, to more people, the president should fold his tent, accept the result, and really allow the president-elect to get engaged fully in the transition process. It's good for our democracy.
Is there any kind of equal protection argument that could be plausibly made in this case to try and get something in front of the Supreme Court?
I think it's going to be a heavy lift, Adam, to do that. I don't see this going to the Supreme Court of the United States. Yesterday it was reported that all state election officials in the country have reported no evidence of voter fraud. That's what the president is claiming, massive voter fraud. And if the people across the country who are responsible, the Bill Gardners of this world, are saying we don't see any problem in our state. I mean, yesterday, Governor Sununu, or 2 days ago, Governor Sununu said he didn't see any fraud here. And so I think the president is having a tough time coming to terms with his loss, and I'm sure it's hard. But at some point, it's our democracy that we need to uphold.
This is likely to continue as the president is not necessarily giving up at this point. So more broadly, what impact do you see this fight having on the rule of law?
I think if it continues, Adam, it's troubling to me as an American. Forget the fact that I'm a lawyer. But our democracy is our democracy because we believe in the process of our democracy. We don't believe in people necessarily. We don't take an oath. Those of us who take an oath don't take it to a person. We take it to a constitution, state and federal. And I think our constitutional system of government has worked very well. Sometimes we like who's elected, sometimes we don't. And that's okay, that's democracy. But the more the president suggests, very directly suggests, that our process of voting and counting votes is corrupt, that's not a good image for around the world, and it's not accurate, by the way. So I think it's time that we all said the election's over and we have a new president. And I hope the president comes to that reality check soon.
You know, America certainly has had its rocky transitions presidentially in the past, distant past. 1800, 1860 come to mind. What if this is the new normal now, that people fight this out to the bitter end?
Adam, I couldn't hear your question. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'll just repeat it, Justice. America has had its rocky transitions. 1800, 1860 come to mind. It's a long time ago. But what happens if this becomes the new normal?
It will be destructive if it's our new normal. I'm hopeful, Adam, that we can stop the screaming, lower the temperature, start talking to each other again. As the president said recently, we're all Americans. We may disagree on certain policies, but we have far more in common than we have differences. And so I think it's important. I think it behooves all of us, whatever side you're on, to say we have a new president, we have a new government, but mostly we need to have a successful president, because if he or she someday is successful, the country will advance. I just don't think it's helpful. At some point, elections are held for a reason, and we need to honor that.
Okay, let's get to Joe Biden. First, what was it that you saw in him back in the mid-1980s when you first decided to back him running for the White House?
I met him at a state Democratic dinner in New Hampshire. I was legal counsel to the Democratic Party back then. And he was the keynote speaker. He was there with his wife, Jill. And he was inspiring, energized, and decent. I thought he was extraordinarily decent. I had some time with him that night, and he was thinking of running at the time for president. And he wrote me a note, and about a week later, he said, "If I go, John, I'm going to come back after you." And in fact, he was going. He came back, and I joined the campaign. You know, Judge McAuliffe, now Judge McAuliffe, was the co-chair of that campaign. Former Ambassador Terry Shoemaker, Mary Carey Foley from Portsmouth, and her mother, former Mayor Eileen Foley. We were all involved, and we loved his honesty, his decency, and his normalcy. Joe Biden is the neighbor you always wanted. I mean that. He's just a decent person, and I was drawn to him, and I was happy to support him.
Yeah, you and Terry Shoemaker now get bragging rights, having picked presidents in back-to-back primary elections in '88 and '92, but it just took 30 years for Biden to deliver on that promise. So how do you think, though, that he's going to be able to deliver on another promise of cooling the fever of partisanship when things are more divided than ever in Washington?
Well, it's not totally up to him, obviously. But I've known him now for 34 years. He's extraordinarily thoughtful. He has a wealth of experience. He's been around this track before. He served under President Obama for 8 years. And he knows almost every member of Congress who's been there for more than a decade. And he's worked over his career, Adam, on both sides of the aisle. And I have every confidence that Joe Biden will extend an open palm to all the people in that Congress on both sides. Look, his legacy will be largely built on the next 4 years. It's a critical time, not for Democrats or Republicans. It's a critical time for our nation at home and abroad. And, you know, as we know, the virus doesn't pick political sides. The economy doesn't pick political sides. We have challenges in this country, and they're not just Democrat or Republican challenges. They are challenges for Americans. And I'm confident that the Joe Biden I've been privileged to know all these years will set the right tone. I hope others join him, because we need to move forward. We all know that.
For the first time in a long time, it looks like we're going to have a president who did not do well in the First in the Nation primary. And the primary is, as you know, in many ways a road test for a future administration, facing and solving problems and adversity in real time. And his campaign here struggled in many ways. There was sometimes a disconnection, it seemed, between local and national. Do you see any warning signs for a Biden administration in that?
I don't. I think the reason the campaign had trouble here, I think, some of it may have been strategic within the campaign itself. But I think mostly, we had Senator Sanders and Senator Warren, who are neighbors in the state. And I think it's a hard climb when you're running against neighboring state senators. And that may have had something to do with it. But I think Joe Biden from day one was running a national campaign. I mean, he had national name recognition. And he, I think, was hoping that what has happened would happen. I'm sure he was disappointed by the primary here, but he loves New Hampshire. I know that. And he has a lot of friends up here. I'm not the only one by any means. No, I don't think so. I think he respects his primary process and will honor it.
And do you think that he'll be turning to any Granite Staters for administration posts, yourself included?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I know one night when he was speaking in Concord, Governor Lynch was there, and he said, "I'd like to get Governor Lynch to Washington when I become president." I assume he will, because he has friends up here who we respect. So it wouldn't surprise me, but I think it's so early in the process. As we know, they're still counting votes in some states. So I think it'll take a while, but I wouldn't be at all surprised. I almost would expect that there'll be some Granite Staters in the administration at some level.
All right, Justice Broderick, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Adam, thanks for having me on.